The fluorescent lights in Brooklyn Housing Court buzzed like trapped insects, casting a sickly pallor over everyone's skin. Lydia Harper shifted on the hard wooden bench, her canvas tote bag clutched tightly on her lap. The courtroom smelled of industrial cleaner, sweat, and desperation. A scent Lydia had come to recognize over the past few months of extensions and hearings. Case number 4721, Harper versus Voss Properties, called the clerk, voice flat and practiced. Lydia rose, her knees protesting after 2 hours of waiting. She was 50, though the past year had carved deeper lines around her eyes and mouth, making her look older. Her hands, red and slightly swollen from years of scrubbing other people's spaces, trembled slightly as she approached the bench. Clara Voss stood at the other table, scrolling through her phone with manicured nails. She wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Lydia's monthly rent, a strand of pearls gleaming at her throat. When she glanced up, her eyes passed over Lydia with practiced indifference before returning to the judge. "Your Honor, the tenant has received 3 extensions already," Clara said, her voice smooth as polished marble. "Voss Properties has been more than accommodating, but we're running a business, not a charity." The word charity stung Lydia's ears. She had never wanted charity. She'd cleaned offices at night and apartments on weekends, her hands perpetually smelling of lemon cleaner and bleach. She'd paid her rent on time for 11 years until Daniel's accident at the delivery warehouse had forced him to miss work, and then her own hours had been cut. And then Lily had needed that inhaler. "Miss Harper," the judge said, peering over reading glasses, "do you have anything to add?" Lydia swallowed, her throat dry. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm only 3 months behind. I've been with the building for 11 years. I've lined up extra weekend work, and my son is back to full shifts now. If I could just have one more extension." "The court acknowledges your circumstances," the judge interrupted, already writing something on his pad. "However, the law is clear in these matters. Voss Properties has fulfilled all legal notification requirements." Clara's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smiled slightly as though receiving good news while Lydia's world collapsed. "Eviction is granted," the judge continued. "You have 10 days to vacate the premises." 10 days. The words fell like stones. Lydia clutched the edge of the table to steady herself. "Your Honor," she tried again. "My granddaughter." 10 days, Ms. Harper, the judge repeated, already looking toward the clerk for the next case. Next matter. Outside in the corridor, Lydia sat heavily on a bench, her canvas tote sliding to the floor. Inside was the snow globe Daniel had given her years ago, a lighthouse with a light that no longer worked. Also inside, the original eviction notice, now accompanied by cords, papers she would need to sign before leaving. People moved around her in the hallway, a river of misfortune flowing in both directions. Someone was crying in a corner. Someone else was shouting into a phone. The elevators dinged periodically, disgorging more worried faces. "Miss." Harper Clara Voss stood before her, holding out a business card. "For future reference, this is the name of a shelter with relatively clean facilities. They sometimes have family units. The casual cruelty of it, the assumption that Lydia would need a shelter, delivered with the same tone one might recommend a mediocre restaurant, made her stomach clench. "I won't be needing that," Lydia said quietly, not taking the card. Clara raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Pride doesn't keep anyone warm, Ms. Harper. We all have choices, but sometimes those choices are limited by our circumstances." Lydia looked up, meeting Clara's gaze directly. "And some people choose not to see the circumstances of others." Something flickered briefly in Clara's eyes. Discomfort, perhaps, or annoyance at being challenged, before she smoothed it away with practiced ease. "The locks will be changed on day 11. "Good luck." She walked away, heels clicking precisely on the linoleum floor, the scent of her expensive perfume lingering like an accusation. That night in her apartment, soon to be someone else's apartment, Lydia sat at her small kitchen table. The radiator clanged and hissed, fighting against the early autumn chill. Through the thin walls, she could hear Mrs. Abernathy's television, the familiar theme song of a game show providing a strange comfort in its consistency. Lydia removed the snow globe from her tote and placed it on the table. Inside, the miniature lighthouse stood on its tiny, rocky outcropping, surrounded by glitter that no longer swirled properly due to a crack in the base. Daniel had saved up for weeks to buy it for her birthday 7 years ago, back when he was still in high school. "We'll find something, Ma," Daniel had said earlier on the phone, his voice tight with worry. "You can stay with us until we figure it out." But Daniel's apartment in the Bronx was a studio, barely big enough for him and Lily. The thought of squeezed onto his pull-out couch, of being a burden, made Lydia's chest ache. She gently shook the snow globe, watching as the glitter sluggishly settled around the lighthouse. Once the light inside had glowed when you twisted the base. Now it remained dark, like so many other things that had once seemed certain. Lydia's phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor at the cleaning company. "Hours cut again next week. Sorry." She placed the phone face down on the table and put her head in her hands. The apartment held the familiar smells of her life. Coffee, the lavender sachets she made from dollar store supplies, the faint lemon scent that seemed permanently embedded in her skin. Soon these walls would hold someone else's smells, someone else's life. Someone who could afford Clara Voss's steadily increasing rent. Outside, Brooklyn continued its nighttime symphony. Distant sirens, the rumble of the subway, laughter from the bar down the street. Inside, Lydia Harper sat alone at her kitchen table, planning how to fit 11 years of living into whatever boxes she could afford to buy. The morning after the court hearing, Lydia woke before her alarm, the pale light of dawn seeping through thin curtains. For a moment, the weight of yesterday hadn't yet settled back onto her shoulders. Then it returned, heavy as wet wool. 9 days left. She made coffee in the chipped pot she'd bought at a stoop sale years ago, the bitter aroma filling the small kitchen. As she sipped, she remembered another kitchen, wider, warmer, with yellow curtains her mother had sewn by hand. Back in Ohio, where the river fog rolled in each morning and the freight trains announced themselves with long, mournful whistles. Her father, James Harper, had been known throughout their small town as the man who could fix anything. His hands, perpetually stained with grease or paint or wood stain, had brought countless discarded items back to life. "Nothing's really broken beyond repair," he would say, just waiting for the right person to understand what it needs. Lydia carried her coffee to the window. The street below was beginning to wake, a delivery truck idling, a dog walker with 3 mismatched dogs, early commuters hunched against the morning chill. This neighborhood had been home for 11 years, ever since she'd left Ohio with Daniel. Then a gangly 19-year-old with dreams of music school. The memory of her arrival in Brooklyn surfaced, the overwhelm of noise and movement, the disorienting subway maps, the cramped apartment that cost twice what she'd paid back home. She'd been terrified but determined, having promised Daniel a chance at something better than the slow economic decline of their hometown. "We'll make it work," she told him, unpacking their meager belongings in the apartment that now, impossibly, she had to leave. Her phone buzzed. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. "Mom, you okay?" His voice was rough with sleep, or worry, or both. "I'm fine," she lied, watching a pigeon land on her windowsill. "Just having my coffee." "I've been thinking. You know my delivery route goes through that fancy part of the Bronx? I was talking to one of the doormen. Said they need a night cleaner in the building. It's union." "Benefits, Ma." Hope flickered briefly, then dimmed. "Daniel, I've applied to 20 places in the last month. Everyone wants younger people, cheaper people. This guy owes me. I've been slipping him cigarettes all winter. Let me put in a word." After they hung up, Lydia pulled out the box where she kept her important papers. Birth certificates, Daniel's high school diploma, her own GED earned in night classes while working days. Beneath them lay the only photo she had of her ex-husband, Marcus. In it, he smiled broadly, one arm around a pregnant Lydia, the other pointing proudly to the used car he'd just bought. 6 months later, that car would carry him away for good, leaving behind only irregular child support checks that eventually stopped coming altogether. The snow globe sat on her nightstand, catching the strengthening morning light. She'd purchased it at a gift shop during a rare family vacation to the Jersey Shore when Daniel was 13. The lighthouse had reminded her of a book she'd loved as a child, about a keeper who saved ships from dangerous rocks. She'd given the snow globe to Daniel after Marcus left, telling him, "Sometimes we have to be our own lighthouse." Years later, when Daniel gave her the new snow globe for her birthday, he'd said, "Now I can be yours." Lydia dressed for her cleaning shift at the office tower on Water Street, pulling on the blue uniform that smelled perpetually of industrial detergent. In the bathroom mirror, she noticed the gray that had overtaken her once dark hair, the fine lines that bracketed her mouth. Her mother had aged this way too, suddenly, as if time had been saving up its effects and delivered them all at once. The day passed in a blur of vacuum noise, chemical smells, and the peculiar invisibility that came with her job. Men in expensive suits walked past her as if she were part of the furniture. Women in heels balanced coffee cups and phone calls, occasionally nodding in her direction, but rarely making eye contact. Lydia wiped fingerprints from glass doors and wondered if Clara Voss had ever had to clean someone else's mess. That evening, Lydia picked up Lily from her after-school program. The 7-year-old's backpack squeaked when she moved, the rubber duck keychain Daniel had attached to the zipper serving as both toy and identifier. "Grandma!" Lily's face lit up, her serious eyes, so like Daniel's, warming. "I drew a picture of us at the park." Miss Jenkins said it was really good perspective. "That's wonderful, honey," Lydia said, taking Lily's small hand in hers. "Let's see it when we get home." The word home caught in her throat. Where would home be in 8 days now? They took the subway to a small diner where the owner, Mr. Giannopoulos, sometimes gave Lily extra fries. The place smelled of grease and coffee and the faintly sweet scent of the flowers Mrs. Giannopoulos kept on the counter. "Look who's here," Mr. Giannopoulos called out when they entered. "My favorite artist!" Lily beamed, immediately pulling out her drawing to show him. Lydia slid into their usual booth, the vinyl seat patched with duct tape in 3 places. "The usual?" Mr. Giannopoulos asked, already pouring Lydia a cup of coffee. "Yes, please," she said, grateful for the small routines that made up a life. As they ate, Lily chattered about school and friends and a science project involving beans growing in different conditions. Lydia nodded and asked questions, storing away each detail of her granddaughter's day-like treasures. "Daddy says we might all live together soon," Lily said suddenly, dunking a fry into ketchup. "Like a sleepover that doesn't end." Lydia's heart squeezed. "Maybe for a little while," she said carefully. "He said we might have to get rid of some stuff. But not Snow Globe Lighthouse. He said that stays no matter what." The simple certainty in Lily's voice, the absolute faith that some things were non-negotiable, made Lydia's eyes burn. She blinked rapidly, focusing on cutting her sandwich into smaller pieces. Later, after Lydia had tucked Lily into the pull-out couch in Daniel's apartment and taken the bus back to her own place, she sat on the edge of her bed and finally allowed herself to cry. The tears came quietly, a lifetime of practice in not disturbing others. When the tears subsided, she washed her face and made a list. Items to keep, items to sell, items to give away. The snow globe went first on the keep list, followed by the photo albums, Lily's baby blanket, the small wooden box her father had made. Outside, Brooklyn settled into its nighttime rhythms. Distant music from someone's party, the occasional car horn, the hum of millions of lives, stacked alongside and on top of each other. Lydia Harper, daughter of a fixer, mother of a fighter, grandmother to a dreamer, finally slept, her hand curled protectively around the snow globe as if it contained not just a lighthouse, but a way forward through the gathering dark. By day 5, Lydia's apartment had transformed into a maze of cardboard boxes and black garbage bags. The walls, stripped of family photos, revealed faded rectangles like ghosts of happier times. The air smelled of dust and packing tape and endings. "You can store some things at my place," Daniel said, wedging another box into the corner of the living room. His face was drawn with exhaustion. He'd come straight from an overnight delivery shift. The logo on his uniform shirt faded from too many washes. "There's no room," Lydia replied, wrapping a coffee mug in newspaper. It was one Lily had painted at a community center workshop, blue with wobbly yellow stars. "Your apartment barely fits you and Lily as it is." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his grandfather that Lydia's heart twisted. "The super at work says his cousin might have a room." "In Queens?" "A room," Lydia repeated, the words sitting heavy between them. "Not an apartment, not a home. A room." "It's temporary, Ma." "Until we figure something out." The doorbell rang, Ms. Abernathy from next door holding a plate of oatmeal cookies. "Thought you might need something sweet," she said, her eyes taking in the dismantled apartment. "Such a shame. 30 years I've lived here, seen so many people come and go. Never thought they'd push you out too." "They're renovating," Lydia said, accepting the plate. "Exposed brick and morning light. Charging triple, I bet," Mrs. Abernathy sniffed. "That Clara woman came by yesterday, measuring my door frames. Told her I've got a lease till next June. She just smiled that cat who got the cream smile of hers." After Mrs. Abernathy left, Lydia checked her email on her cracked phone screen. Another rejection for a janitorial position, this one claiming she was overqualified. The real reason, she knew, remained unspoken. Too old, too expensive, too likely to need health benefits. Daniel had gone to take a shower. Alone in the half-empty apartment, Lydia allowed herself a moment of pure terror. What if there was no room in Queens? What if Daniel lost his job next? What if Lily, with her asthma, got sick again? The snow globe sat on the windowsill, the only decoration remaining. Lydia picked it up, feeling its familiar weight. The broken light, the cracked base, the glitter that moved too slowly now, it was a perfect metaphor for her life at the moment. Still standing, but not working quite right. Her phone pinged with a notification. Absently, she opened it. A neighborhood forum where people posted items for sale, jobs, local news. Her thumb scrolled mechanically until a photo caught her attention. A small cabin, weathered gray wood, surrounded by maple trees. The caption read, "Old cabin near Kingston must go. $100, bring cash, clearing estate." Something stirred in Lydia's memory, her father talking about a fishing cabin his buddy had near the Catskills. "Peace there," he'd said. "Man can hear himself think." She zoomed in on the photo. The cabin listed slightly to one side, like an old man leaning on a cane. The windows were grimy, one possibly cracked. The door hung at an odd angle. Behind it, barely visible, was the silver thread of a creek or river. $100. She had 95 in the snow globe box. Her emergency fund slowly accumulated in singles and fives. With the change in her purse, she'd have just enough. It was madness, of course. A broken-down cabin miles from the city, from Daniel and Lily, from any possibility of work. Probably no electricity, maybe no running water. Certainly no heat with winter coming. And yet, her finger hovered over the message seller button. The apartment around her held 11 years of life, but it wasn't hers anymore. Clara Voss and her pearls and her clipboard had seen to that. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Houses keep secrets. Sometimes they keep people. Lydia pressed the button. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of day that made bones ache and spirits sag. Lydia boarded a bus to Kingston, the canvas tote clutched on her lap. Inside, the snow globe, carefully wrapped in a t-shirt. Her father's folding knife, the $95 plus 4 in quarters, and a printed email exchange with Eleanor Bright's nephew, who'd agreed to meet her at the cabin. As the bus pulled away from Port Authority, Lydia watched the city recede, its sharp edges blurring in the rain. The highway stretched before them, wet asphalt reflecting taillights like red stars. Other passengers dozed or stared at phones. A child a few seats ahead played some game that made electronic pinging sounds. Lydia pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, watching suburbs give way to small towns, then to rolling hills flecked with early autumn color. The landscape opened up, breathing room between buildings, between lives. 2 hours later, the bus wheezed to a stop at a small station in Kingston. The air smelled different here, cleaner, with notes of wet leaves and river water. Lydia followed the directions she'd written on a scrap of paper, walking first along a main road lined with brick buildings, then turning onto a narrower lane where houses grew progressively farther apart. A blue pickup truck idled at the end of a rutted dirt road, a man in a flannel shirt leaning against the hood. He straightened when he saw her approaching. Miss Yes. Harper? I'm Jim Bright, Eleanor's nephew. His handshake was firm, his eyes kind beneath a weathered baseball cap. Wasn't sure you'd really come. Most city folks take one look at the place and turn right around. The cabin stood in a small clearing, maple trees forming a loose circle around it like silent guardians. Up close, it looked even more dilapidated than in the photo. The roof sagged in one corner, the porch steps had partially collapsed, and what might have once been a flower bed was now a tangle of weeds and wild mint that released its sharp scent as they walked through it. It's not much, Jim said apologetically, working a key into the rusty lock. Aunt Ellie lived here until she had her stroke in '85. Been sitting mostly empty since, except for the occasional hunter or fisherman needing a place to crash. The door opened with a groan of protest. Inside dust motes danced in the weak light, filtering through dirty windows. The space was simple. One main room with a small iron stove in the corner, a rough wooden table with 2 mismatched chairs, shelves built into one wall. A doorway led to what Lydia presumed was a bedroom, and another, narrower one probably led to a bathroom or storage area. No electricity anymore, Jim said, moving a curtain aside to let in more light. But the well still works. Hand pump on the porch. Stove's wood burning, good enough to heat the place in winter if you're hardy. Aunt Ellie was. Lydia moved slowly through the space, her shoes leaving prints in the dust. Despite the neglect, there was something solid about the cabin, something honest. The walls, made of rough-hewn logs, had weathered storms and seasons. The floors, wide pine planks worn smooth by decades of footsteps, creaked welcomingly beneath her weight. Outside, the Esopus Creek rushed over rocks, its voice rising and falling with the wind. A blue jay called sharply, answered by the rustling of leaves. Why only $100? Lydia asked finally, turning to face Jim. He shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable. Land's not worth much. Access Road crosses Voss property. There's some development company buying up everything around here. They've been trying to get this plot too, but Aunt Ellie's will was specific. Said the cabin goes to a woman raising a child alone in the hope she feels less alone under this roof. Thought she was being poetic, but turns out she meant it legally. Something flickered in Lydia's chest. Not quite hope, but its quieter cousin. Possibility. Voss Properties? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. Jim nodded. You know them? We've met, Lydia said, running her fingers along the dusty windowsill. My son has a daughter. I help raise her. Jim studied her face, then nodded again, more slowly. Aunt Ellie would have liked that. She raised my cousin Becky by herself after my uncle died in Vietnam. Tough as nails, but soft where it counted. Lydia opened her tote bag and carefully extracted the snow globe. She placed it on the wooden table where it caught what little light filtered through the dirty windows. Even in its broken state, the lighthouse stood tall on its rocky outcropping, a small sentinel against the gathering dark. I'll take it, she said. As they completed the simple transaction, Lydia counting out crumpled bills, Jim writing a receipt on the back of an envelope, a north wind stirred the trees outside, sending a shower of early turned leaves against the cabin windows. The creek's song grew louder, more insistent. Lydia Harper, standing in the dusty cabin with the deed clutched in her hand, felt something shift inside her like a lighthouse beam suddenly cutting through fog, illuminating a path forward that had been there all along, waiting to be found. The next day, Lydia sat Daniel and Lily down in the nearly empty Brooklyn apartment, the bare walls amplifying every sound. Daniel's face cycled through disbelief, concern, and something like awe as Lydia described the cabin. You bought a place? In the woods? With your emergency money? His voice cracked slightly on the last word. It's not much, Lydia admitted, smoothing the wrinkles from the deed spread on the table between them. But it's something that can't be taken away. But Ma, what about work? What about Lily's school? What about... He gestured vaguely at the window where the city pulsed beyond. Everything. Lily, who had been quietly absorbing the adults' conversation, suddenly piped up. Does it have animals? Real ones, not just pigeons and rats? The innocent question broke the tension. Daniel's shoulders relaxed slightly as he pulled Lily onto his lap. That's a good question, Squirt. Does this cabin have animals, Ma? Probably, Lydia said, smiling at her granddaughter's priorities. I saw birds and heard squirrels. Maybe deer, too. Can we see it? Lily asked, her eyes wide with the possibility of adventure. Please, Daddy? Daniel looked at his mother, his expression softening. He understood what this cabin represented, not just a solution to immediate homelessness, but a reclaiming of something that had been taken from them bit by bit over the years. Choice. Yeah, he said finally. Let's see this cabin of yours. The weekend trip to Kingston took on the atmosphere of a strange holiday. Lily brought her backpack stuffed with exploration essentials, a magnifying glass, a notebook for recording discoveries, a flashlight with batteries that hadn't been checked. Daniel packed more practically. Tools, cleaning supplies, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Lydia carried the snow globe in her tote, cushioned between sweaters. The bus ride was filled with Lily's excited chatter about woodland creatures and Daniel's quiet concerns whispered to Lydia when his daughter was distracted by passing scenery. How would they make this work? What about the winter? What about money? Lydia had no answers yet, only the deed in her pocket and the memory of her father saying, sometimes the biggest problems have the simplest solutions, hidden right where you'd never think to look. When they arrived at the cabin, the September afternoon was sliding into evening, golden light filtering through the trees and casting long shadows across the clearing. Lily immediately raced to the creek, dropping her backpack on the porch with a thud that sent up a small cloud of dust. Careful near the water, Daniel called after her, then turned to survey the cabin with a contractor's eye. Roof needs work before winter. Porch is salvageable. Wiring. There is no wiring, Lydia said, working the rusted lock. No electricity. Daniel's eyebrows rose. So we're basically camping. In September? In upstate New York? The door finally swung open, releasing the musty scent of abandonment. Dust and old paper and something greener, like moss or ferns that had found their way inside. Daniel stepped in cautiously, testing the floor with his weight before committing. Structurally sound, at least, he murmured, moving toward the iron stove and inspecting its flue. This works, we can stay warm. Water from the well. Might not be so bad for a while. Lydia set the snow globe on the rough wooden table where it caught the last of the day's light. Something about seeing it there in this new place with its own kind of broken beauty made her throat tighten. Lily bounded in, cheeks flushed from the creek air. I found a blue rock and something that might be a fossil, and there are fish in the water. She stopped, taking in the cabin's interior with wide eyes. It's like a fairy tale house, she whispered, then sneezed as dust tickled her nose. A very dirty fairy tale, Daniel said, opening a window to let in fresh air. Let's clean before we unpack. They worked as the light faded, sweeping and scrubbing, Daniel fixing the worst of the porch steps with supplies from his bag. Lydia found old kerosene lamps in a cupboard, their glass bases cloudy but intact. With matches from Daniel's emergency kit, they soon had golden light flickering across the freshly swept floor. Lily, tasked with arranging their meager belongings, skipped from corner to corner, testing each floorboard with exaggerated stomps. Near the back wall, one board gave a different sound, hollow like a drum with a dampened skin. This one sounds funny, she announced, crouching to press her ear against the floor. It's breathing. Daniel and Lydia exchanged looks. The imagination of a 7-year-old was boundless. But when they joined her, they felt it too. A slight current of air rising from between the floorboards, as if the cabin itself were sighing. Daniel ran his fingers along the seam. There's a gap here. And he pressed at one end of the board, which lifted slightly. It's not nailed down like the others. With careful prying using his pocket knife, Daniel lifted the plank, revealing a dark space beneath. The musty smell intensified, but something metallic gleamed in the lamplight. There's a box, Lily whispered, her voice hushed with the magic of discovery. Daniel reached into the space and pulled out a tarnished tin container, about the size of a cigar box, but heavier. Dust coated his fingers as he placed it on the floor between them. Should we open it? He asked, looking at his mother. Lydia nodded, her father's words echoing. Houses keep secrets. Sometimes they keep people. The lid resisted at first, years of disuse having sealed it shut. With gentle persistence, it finally gave way with a soft pop that seemed to release not just air, but time itself, a moment preserved from decades past. Inside lay several items, a yellowed envelope tied with faded blue thread. A deed older than the one in Lydia's pocket, its edges browned with age, and a photograph, its surface cracked, but the image still clear. A woman standing on the very porch they had just repaired, her arm around a young girl approximately Lily's age. On the back, written in careful script, Eleanor and Rebecca, spring 1979. Daniel carefully unfolded the letter from the envelope. The paper crackled beneath his fingers as he read aloud. To whoever finds this cabin, I hope you needed it as much as we did. My name is Eleanor Bright, and I came here with my daughter after my husband died in the war. We had nowhere else to go, and this place saved us. It isn't much, but it's built solid, and the creek never runs dry. When they tried to take it from us, the men with their papers and plans for vacation homes, I found that the original deed granted rights to this land that couldn't be overturned. The right-of-way through what is now the Taylor property, though they'll probably sell it to developers eventually, cannot be closed off according to county law. I am leaving this letter and the original deed in hopes that someday another woman raising a child alone might find this place and feel the same shelter. We did. The law is clear, though they'll try to tell you otherwise. Stand your ground. This cabin keeps its promises. With hope for whoever you are, Eleanor Bright, 1979. The three of them sat in silence after Daniel finished reading, the kerosene lamps casting their shadows large against the cabin walls. Outside, night creatures had begun their chorus. Frogs by the creek, an owl somewhere in the distance, the rustling of something small moving through underbrush. Taylor property, Lydia said finally. That must be what's now owned by Voss. Daniel studied the old deed, squinting in the dim light. This shows a right-of-way that cuts directly through what would be their land. If this is still legally binding, then they can't keep us from accessing the cabin, Lydia finished. Her heart beat faster. And they can't develop over the right-of-way without permission. Lily, who had been examining the photograph, looked up. She looks nice, she said simply, like she would make good cookies and tell good stories. Lydia brushed her fingers across the photo. Eleanor Bright's face was kind but determined, her arm protective around her daughter. A woman who had stood her ground, a woman who had thought to leave behind not just a deed, but a lifeline across time. Tomorrow, Lydia said, we visit the Ulster County Clerk's office. Daniel nodded, carefully returning the items to the box. Looks like this cabin chose you, Ma. Or Eleanor did. Outside, the wind picked up, sending leaves skittering across the porch. Inside, 3 generations of Harpers sat close together in lamplight, feeling, for the first time in years, the stirring of something that felt remarkably like hope. The Ulster County Clerk's office smelled of paper and toner, with undertones of coffee and the faint mustiness that seemed to permeate all government buildings. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a flat, unforgiving glow that made everyone look slightly ill. The linoleum floor, buffed to a dull shine, squeaked beneath Lydia's worn shoes as she approached the counter. The tin box clutched to her chest like armor. Daniel stood beside her, his work uniform exchanged for his one button-down shirt, slightly wrinkled from being packed in his overnight bag. Lily sat on a nearby bench, her backpack squeaking whenever she shifted position. the rubber duck keychain catching the harsh light. "How can I help you?" The clerk, a woman with silver-framed glasses and practical hands, looked up from her computer. "I'd like to verify a property deed," Lydia said, placing the tin box on the counter. "And a right-of-way claim from 1979. The clerk, her nameplate read Patricia Wilson, nodded efficiently. "Property address?" As Lydia provided the details, Patricia's fingers moved over her keyboard with practiced ease. The rhythmic clicking filled the quiet office, punctuated occasionally by the thump of a stamp or the soft conversations at other counters. "That's odd," Patricia murmured, frowning at her screen. "The system shows that parcel as part of the Voss Properties Development Project. There's a notice of intent to build filed last month." Daniel tensed beside Lydia. "That can't be right." "We have the deed right here, purchased just days ago." Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly at his tone, but her voice remained professional. "Let me see your documentation, please." Lydia handed over both deeds, the one she'd received from Jim Bright and the older one from Eleanor's hidden box. Patricia examined them carefully, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to growing interest. "This older deed does indeed show a legal right-of-way through what is now Voss property," she said, reaching for a large book on a nearby shelf. "Let me check the county records to confirm." As Patricia flipped through pages of recorded deeds and easements, the office door opened, bringing a gust of cool air and the scent of expensive perfume. Clara Voss walked in, followed by a man in a tailored suit carrying a leather portfolio. When Clara spotted Lydia, she stopped mid-stride, her perfectly composed face showing a flash of genuine surprise before settling back into professional smoothness. "Mrs. Harper," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet office. "This is unexpected. Kingston is quite a distance from Brooklyn." Lydia straightened her shoulders, meeting Clara's gaze directly. "Miss Voss. I could say the same." Clara approached the counter, the man trailing behind her. "Richard Thompson, our legal counsel," she introduced him with a slight gesture. "We're here to finalize some property acquisitions in the area." Patricia looked up from her records, assessing the new arrivals with the neutral expression of someone who had witnessed countless property disputes. "I'm currently helping these customers verify a deed and right-of-way claim. It might relate to your properties, miss." "Voss?" Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Which property?" "The old Bright cabin," Lydia answered before Patricia could respond. "I purchased it last week." Something flickered in Clara's expression, recognition, then calculation. "Ah, Jim Bright's listing. We've been trying to acquire that parcel to complete our development. Unfortunately, the access road crosses our land." "Actually," Patricia interjected, turning the large book so they could all see it, "according to county records, there's a legally recorded right-of-way easement from 1979 that grants perpetual access across what was then the Taylor property, now owned by Voss. It's quite specific." Clara leaned forward, her pearl necklace swinging slightly as she examined the record. "That can't be right. Our surveys didn't show any easements." "Perhaps your surveyors missed it," Patricia suggested mildly, placing a finger on a line of text. "It's clearly recorded here, and I've just confirmed that Eleanor Bright's will is also on file, stipulating that the property should pass to a woman raising a child alone, in the hope she feels less alone under this roof. That's quite specific language for a legal document." Richard Thompson set his portfolio on the counter and removed several papers. "We have documentation showing clear title to all surrounding properties with no encumbrances." "May I?" Patricia held out her hand for the papers, then compared them with the records in front of her. The office had grown quieter, other customers and clerks subtly tuning in to the drama unfolding. Lily slid off the bench and came to stand beside Lydia, slipping her small hand into her grandmother's. Clara's gaze flicked to the child, then back to the documents, her expression hardening. "There appears to be a discrepancy," Patricia said finally. "Your survey doesn't show the easement, but our county records clearly indicate it exists and was never terminated. Additionally, she pulled out another document from a drawer. There's a specific notation that this right-of-way cannot be extinguished without the express written consent of the cabin owner, even if surrounding properties change hands. Clara's lawyer frowned, flipping through his papers with increasing urgency. This will delay our entire development timeline. The access road runs directly through where we've planned the clubhouse. Unfortunate, Patricia commented, without a hint of sympathy. She turned to Lydia. Would you like me to make certified copies of these records for your files, Mrs. Harper? I recommend keeping documentation on hand. Yes, please, Lydia said, her voice steadier than she felt. Clara straightened, smoothing her already smooth hair with one manicured hand. This is a minor setback. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement. Voss Properties is prepared to offer significantly more than you paid for the cabin. 3 times the amount, in fact. Daniel shifted beside Lydia, and she knew he was thinking of all the ways that money could help them. Rent on a bigger apartment, maybe college savings for Lily, a cushion against future emergencies. But Lydia remembered Eleanor's letter, the photograph of the woman and her daughter standing proudly on the porch of their sanctuary. She thought of the creek's voice, the solid feel of the cabin's walls, the way Lily had explored the clearing as if she'd found a magical kingdom. The cabin isn't for sale, Lydia said simply. Clara's professional mask slipped momentarily, revealing genuine frustration. Be reasonable, Mrs. Harper. That cabin is barely habitable. No electricity, probably no proper plumbing. Winter is coming. What exactly do you plan to do out there? Live, Lydia answered. Make it a home. You told me once that we all have choices, she continued, her voice quiet but carrying in the hushed office. You were right. And this is mine. Clara studied her for a long moment, reassessing the woman she had dismissed so easily in Brooklyn Housing Court. The other customers in the office had stopped pretending not to listen, their attention fixed on the confrontation. The easement may be valid, Richard Thompson said to Clara in a low voice, but we could challenge it. Tie it up in court for years. During which time, Patricia interjected, having overheard, the right-of-way would remain in effect pending final determination. County ordinances are quite clear on that point. She smiled pleasantly as she stamped several documents with an official seal, the sound punctuating her words. Clara's gaze moved from Lydia to Daniel to Lily, then to the growing number of onlookers, the regular people of Ulster County who had come to file papers, pay taxes, register deeds of their own. People who recognized something in the set of Lydia's shoulders, in the quiet dignity with which she stood her ground. We'll need to reconsider our approach, Clara said finally to her lawyer. To Lydia, she added, This isn't over, Mrs. Harper. No, Lydia agreed, accepting the certified copies from Patricia. It's just beginning. As Clara and her lawyer gathered their papers and left, a palpable shift occurred in the office, a collective exhalation, like the release after a thunderstorm passes. An older man in work boots nodded approvingly from his place in line. A young mother bounced a baby on her hip and gave Lydia a small smile of solidarity. Nice to see someone stand up to them, Patricia said quietly as she handed Lydia the final document. They've been buying up everything around here, pushing out families who've been in Kingston for generations. Outside, the September afternoon had turned golden, sunlight warming the brick buildings of the small town. Lily skipped ahead on the sidewalk, her backpack squeaking with each bounce. Daniel walked beside Lydia, the certified document safely tucked in his messenger bag. That was something, Ma, he said, a note of pride in his voice, the way you stood up to her. I wasn't just standing up for us, Lydia replied, watching Lily examine a particularly interesting pebble on the sidewalk. It was for Eleanor, too. And for whoever comes after us. At the bus stop, Lily turned to her grandmother, her expression suddenly serious. Are we really going to live in the cabin? Even in winter? Lydia looked at her son and granddaughter, seeing in their faces both concern and something else. A tentative excitement, a willingness to believe that something broken could be made whole again. We're going to try, Nalai, she said. Your great-grandfather used to say that anything worth having is worth fixing. As they boarded the bus back to the city, back to packing and planning and saying goodbyes, Lydia thought about the cabin waiting for them. Its windows like eyes watching the creek flow past. Its walls holding the memory of another woman who had stood her ground. Not everything broken was beyond repair. Sometimes it was just waiting for the right person to understand what it needed. October painted the maples around the cabin in shades of flame and gold. Mornings arrived with a thin skin of frost on the creek stones. Afternoons softened into amber warmth that smelled of pine and wood smoke. Inside the cabin, transformation had taken hold. Floors swept and sealed, walls scrubbed, windows cleaned until they caught the light and held it like cupped hands. Lydia stood on the newly repaired porch, watching Daniel struggle with an old iron stovepipe. He'd taken a week off from his delivery job, using vacation days he'd been saving for some unspecified future emergency. That emergency had arrived in the form of winter's approach, and now father and daughter worked together. Daniel fixing, Lily handing him tools from a box she'd decorated with stickers and marker drawings. "Grandma, look!" Lily called, pointing to where Daniel had finally connected the last section of pipe to the roof opening. "Daddy says we can have a real fire tonight." "Not too big," Daniel cautioned, climbing down from his ladder. His face was smudged with soot, but his eyes held the satisfaction of work well done. "Just to test it." They had been coming to the cabin on weekends, making improvements bit by bit. Daniel's super had been true to his word. Lydia now cleaned 3 nights a week at a luxury building in the Bronx. The union paid nearly double what she'd earned before. The commute from Kingston was long, but neighbors they'd met through the local church offered rides when their shifts aligned. Community had found them in unexpected ways. Mrs. Jimenez from 2 properties over, who brought tomatoes from her garden and stayed to help Lydia patch curtains. Mr. Collins from the hardware store, who extended credit and threw in extra supplies just because. Pastor Lisa from the small Methodist church, who organized a workday that resulted in a repaired roof and a yard cleared of decades of debris. The cabin breathed more easily now. Lydia had scrubbed its lungs, the air vents, the chimney, the spaces between floorboards, until it could inhale the crisp mountain air without coughing dust. They'd found treasures as they worked. Old books tucked beneath eaves, jars of beach glass in the back of a cupboard, a child's carved wooden horse behind the stove. Eleanor's presence lingered in these discoveries. Lydia often felt her there, not as a ghost, but as a kindred spirit who understood about starting over, about making something from almost nothing. Sometimes, when the afternoon light slanted just so through the windows, Lydia would pause in her work and imagine Eleanor doing the same task decades earlier, her daughter playing nearby just as Lily did now. This afternoon, as Daniel finished with the stove, a car rumbled up the dirt access road, the sound distinctive and unexpected enough to make all 3 of them pause. Few people drove out this way, especially on a Thursday. The black SUV that emerged from the trees was sleek and expensive, looking entirely out of place against the rustic backdrop. When it stopped in the clearing, Clara Voss stepped out, her heels immediately sinking into the soft ground. "She's back," Lily whispered, moving to stand slightly behind her father. Clara wore a dark coat that fell to her knees, her hair arranged in the same immaculate style as always. But something about her seemed different. Less certain, perhaps, or simply more human outside the controlled environment she usually inhabited. "Mrs. Harper," she called, picking her way carefully across the uneven ground. "May I speak with you?" Lydia descended the porch steps, meeting Clara halfway. Up close, she could see faint shadows beneath the other woman's eyes, partially concealed by makeup. "I thought you might like to know," Clara said without preamble, "that Voss Properties has revised its development plan. We're keeping the existing right-of-way and incorporating it as a nature trail." Lydia's surprise must have shown on her face because Clara continued, her tone businesslike. "It's a practical decision. Fighting the easement would be expensive and time-consuming. This way, we can market the development as being more environmentally conscious. A selling point." But there was something else in her expression, a reluctant respect perhaps, or simply the resignation of someone who recognized when to concede a battle. I've brought the paperwork, Clara added, retrieving a folder from her car. A formal acknowledgement of your right-of-way, signed and notarized. And this, she handed Lydia a second document, is information about a grant program for rural historic home preservation. Your cabin would qualify. Lydia accepted the papers, the weight of them substantial in her hands. Thank you, she said simply. Clara glanced at the cabin, taking in the improvements, the smoke now curling from the newly installed chimney pipe, the carefully tended clearing. You've been busy. We have, Lydia agreed. An awkward silence stretched between them. Two women from different worlds, standing on ground that had once been contested and was now simply shared. I misjudged you, Clara said finally, the words seeming to cost her something. In Brooklyn, I see a lot of people in my position. After a while, they all start to blur together. We're not blurry, Lydia said. We're just trying to live. Clara nodded once sharply. Well, the paperwork is in order. Good luck with your cabin, Mrs. Harper. As she turned to go, Daniel stepped forward from the porch. Would you like some coffee before you drive back? It's a long way to the city. The invitation hung in the air, unexpected and genuine. Clara hesitated, then nodded again. That would be nice, thank you. Inside, the cabin welcomed them with the warmth of a space recently brought back to life. Lily shyly showed Clara her collection of creek stones arranged on the windowsill, explaining which ones might be fossils and which ones just had interesting personalities. Daniel made coffee in an old percolator on the propane camp stove they used for cooking, until the main stove was fully functional. Lydia noticed Clara taking in the details of the cabin, the patchwork curtains, the shelves Daniel had built from reclaimed wood, the small table where the snow globe now stood, catching afternoon light. You've made it quite cozy, Clara said, accepting a mug of coffee. The words sounded stiff, but the sentiment behind them seemed genuine. It's getting there, Lydia replied. One day at a time. They sat at the small table, steam rising from their mugs. The conversation tentative at first, then gradually easing into something almost comfortable. Clara spoke of growing up in a small apartment in Queens, of working her way through school, of starting at Voss Properties as an administrative assistant. Lydia shared stories of Ohio, of her father's repair skills, of Daniel's musical talents that had brought them to New York in the first place. When the coffee was finished, Clara rose to leave. At the door, she paused, looking at the snow globe on the table. That's a lovely piece, she said. It's broken, Lily informed her matter-of-factly. The light doesn't work anymore, and it has a crack. But Grandma says not everything that's broken needs to be thrown away. Clara's expression shifted, something soft and quickly hidden passing across her features. Your grandmother is a wise woman. After Clara's car had disappeared down the access road, the family sat on the porch watching the sun begin its descent behind the trees. The evening air carried the first real bite of approaching winter, but they were ready for it now, woodpile stacked and covered, insulation added to walls, supplies laid in. Do you think she'll come back? Lily asked, leaning against Lydia's side. Maybe, Lydia said. People can surprise you. As darkness gathered, they lit the stove for the first time. The fire caught quickly, casting a golden glow through the iron grate and sending warmth spreading across the main room. They ate a simple dinner at the table, shadows dancing on the walls around them, the creek's voice a constant companion outside. Later, when Lily had fallen asleep in the small bedroom off the main room, Lydia and Daniel sat by the stove, watching the flames through the grate. I have something to tell you, Daniel said, his voice low to avoid waking Lily. I got a call from Pastor Lisa. The church has an old upright piano they're replacing. She asked if we might want it. Lydia looked at her son, understanding the significance. Daniel hadn't played since they'd left Ohio, his dreams of music school set aside for more practical concerns. I told her yes, he continued, if that's okay. It would go right there. He pointed to the empty wall beside the bookshelves. It's more than okay, Lydia said, her throat tightening. It belongs here. November arrived with the last, leaves falling and the first dusting of snow. The piano came too, delivered by church volunteers who stayed for soup and cornbread afterward. That evening, music filled the cabin for the first time, halting at first as Daniel's fingers remembered their way, then growing more confident, the notes rising to the rafters and spilling out into the clearing, where snow caught moonlight and gleamed like scattered stars. On Thanksgiving, they hosted dinner for the neighbors who had helped them. Mrs. Jimenez and Mr. Collins, Pastor Lisa and her wife, the Sullivan family whose sons had helped clear the yard. The cabin filled with voices and laughter, with the smells of turkey and pie, with the warmth of community found rather than born into. As December settled over the mountains, bringing deeper snow and longer nights, the cabin stood sturdy against the cold. Inside, the stove radiated heat. The piano offered music. The repaired windows kept watch over the white blanketed clearing. On Christmas Eve, as Daniel played carols and Lily hung paper snowflakes from the rafters, Lydia placed the snow globe in the center of the small table. She had rewired it that afternoon, a final gift to herself, using skills learned from watching her father all those years ago. When she twisted the base, the tiny lighthouse illuminated for the first time in years, its small beam cutting through the glitter-filled water, a beacon in a miniature world. "You fixed it!" Lily exclaimed, clapping her hands in delight. "I had good teachers," Lydia replied, thinking of her father, of Eleanor Bright, of all the people who had shown her that broken things could be mended, that lost things could be found, that endings often concealed beginnings if you knew where to look. Outside, snow fell softly on the roof, on the porch, on the access road that had become their path home. Inside, 3 generations gathered around the glowing lighthouse, their faces illuminated by its small, persistent light. A family who had learned that sometimes weathering the storm means finding unexpected shelter, and that the truest measure of home isn't its size or location, but the love it contains and the hope it protects. "Grandma," Lily asked, watching the snowflakes swirl inside the globe, "are we rich now?" Daniel smiled, resting his hands on the piano keys. "Not the way most people count it, squirt." "We're rich in what matters," Lydia said, drawing her granddaughter close. "We have roots. We have each other. We have this place that keeps its promises." Through the window, the real snow continued to fall, each flake a small possibility, each moment a gift unwrapping itself in the simple miracle of now. The cabin creaked gently, settling into the night, holding its family safe within walls that had once again become a sanctuary. Not because they were perfect or fancy or new, but because they were sturdy and true and, most importantly, theirs.